early morning hours of 17th of January 1991, coalition air forces unleashed a massive air assault on Iraqi forces in both Iraq and Kuwait. The magnitude of the coalition air offensive dealt a crushing blow to Iraq's air defense network, and soon Allied aircraft roamed at will in the skies over the conflict zone. Coalition forces deployed an entire air superiority package that included a variety of weapons with specific missions. Some of these weapons had never been used in actual combat. A perfect example was the Tomahawk cruise missile. 333 cruise missiles were launched during the war against heavily defended targets such as air defense headquarters, key radar facilities, and major communication centers.
Busy evening. I'll hold it for you.
We've had a very busy evening. As a matter of fact, it's not over yet. This is the opening round of the war. The Tomahawk strikes will continue for another at least 36 hours in conjunction with the airstrikes that are taking place over Iraq right now. I can report to you that the airstrikes have started. The Tomahawks have already started to impact in the Baghdad area, and there are engagements, fighter engagements happening over land at this point. We are following the course of all that as we are remaining vigilant as we steam to our next Tomahawk launch point.
Cruise missile is a 1,000-pound warhead on an unmanned aircraft, shot from just about all the various surface ships and submarines that the Navy's got, and it's done exceptionally well in the first week. I think that there was approximately 500 cruise missiles in the theater on 56 ships, and so far I think we've shot about a third of those in the first week. About 150 have managed to go off. The Tomahawk is a terrific weapon for this kind of warfare, particularly this kind of warfare. It's a significant development to the Navy. It may not sound it originally, but it is a significant development to the Navy. In previous years, the Navy had, in a tactical sense, one, perhaps two ways of striking at an enemy. One is the carrier-based attack systems, A6, A7 in those days, FA-18. And we had big guns, 16-inch guns off the battleship, which proved effective in Vietnam, but against a more capable or more distant enemy were useless. Therefore, the Navy had but a single attack method of taking the fight to the enemy. The surface forces and the submarines never played in the conventional sense. All they were there was to defend the carrier, and that was not to the liking of many of the naval officers. The Tomahawk system, particularly Tomahawk with its long range, gives the Navy ships and submarines a chance to participate and take the fight to the enemy. It was important in this war that Tomahawk worked, and the initial indications are that it's worked exceptionally well.
During the initial stage of the flight, the Tomahawk uses radar terrain comparison guidance, codenamed TERCOM. In the final phase of the attack, the computer switches on its digital scene mapping system, which compares a digital photo of the target stowed in its memory with the actual scene below. This provides pinpoint precision. Modern air campaigns take place in successive phases with clear objectives in each phase. The Gulf War was no exception. One of the initial aims of Operation Desert Storm was the suppression of Iraqi air defenses. This means the elimination of anti-aircraft missile and gun sites, the radars that direct them, and the command and control centers that coordinate them. An air defense network is like a web, running from a central headquarters to local stations, then to the radar posts which detect the aircraft and guide the missiles, and finally to the missiles and guns themselves. The air defense suppression campaign began with the destruction of the command centers which coordinated the Iraqi air defense network, after which radar sites and eventually the missiles themselves were targeted. The first wave of the night attack was spearheaded by the F-117 Black Jet, since it is virtually invisible to Iraqi radars.
So what it is a very highly developed pinpoint strike airplane. It is never going to be a mass bomber. In other words, you can't hang enough on it to make it drop 20 bombs. But it will drop 1 or 2 in a very tiny spot. And therefore, it will probably only be used to hit a pinpoint target, something that's very badly needed, maybe like a control bunker. There was one very classic shot where an F-117 during the war last week dropped a bomb through an air shaft hole, and the debris came out the front door. That is exactly what the 117 does well.
This is another air defense sector over in the western part of Iraq. It's already been struck by a 117. This is a team effort. The second aircraft comes through, and this part of the building here provides some constructional weakness that will be exploited in this attack, and the bomb will hit in this area here. And this is my counterpart's headquarters in Baghdad. This is the headquarters of the Air Force, and keep your eye on all sides of the building as the airplane overflies the building and drops the bomb down through the center of the building.
On the heels of the F-117s were the Air Force's F-4G Wild Weasels, which attacked critical Iraqi radar sites with HARM anti-radar missiles.
Its job is basically to soak up the air defense. It goes in first and goes out last. And the Wild Weasel missions on this war are 4 hours plus. Now, that's a long time for a fighter. Normally, it's an hour, hour and a half that most guys are flying. So he goes in, he sees when the radar comes up, he goes down there with an anti-radiation missile that homes on radar, and he gets those guys to fire at him, or at least to keep the radar on, so he can in turn destroy the radar-guided AAA, the radar-guided SAMs, radar sites, and the air defense radar sites. Whatever it is, it's going to be a threat to the strike force coming behind him.
The Wild Weasels were remarkably successful in their mission, making the skies safe for other coalition aircraft.
We were shooting the SAMs who were trying to shoot at the guys who were doing what they were doing downtown.
The SAM missile sites in town?
Around the perimeter of the town.
Around the perimeter of Baghdad.
That's correct.
And tell me again about the resistance that you ran into?
Lots of ground fire, lots of AAA, that's anti-aircraft artillery. And like I say, I think there was one SAM fired that I saw, but it was so far away and up through the smoke and haze, it was hard to make it out.
So nothing came close to you?
No, but that's the beauty of the system. We can stay far enough away that that's not going to be a problem for us, from the SAMs anyway. The bullets are the ones that scare me.
U.S. military planners believed that air superiority had to be won for the air and ground campaigns to succeed. The first phase of the air superiority battle was fought by fighter aircraft like this F-15 Eagle of the 1st Tactical Fighter Wing. The fighters flew combat air patrols, nicknamed CAPs, to protect wild weasels and attack planes from Iraqi fighters. The U.S. Air Force's F-15s were joined in their mission by Saudi F-15s, British Tornadoes, and U.S. Navy F-14 Tomcats. Their potential opposition was the more than 400 Iraqi fighters, including sophisticated Soviet-built MiG-29 Fulcrums and French-built Mirage F-1s. Iraqi air forces never challenged coalition forces for control of the skies. Captain Steve Tate was involved in one of the first dogfights of the war in the early morning hours of the 17th of January.
We were in the, took a 4-ship F-15s up on the first wave that went up to Baghdad area last night, took off at 1:30. We were basically supporting a SEAD package of a bunch of wild weasels and a bunch of F-15Es and just an assortment of other airplanes, EF-111s and F-111s that were going up to the southeast portion of Baghdad. Basically what our job was to go up there and remove all the air-to-air threats for them. The mission lasted about 4 hours. We started a engagement. I got the contact that AWACS calls out as a hostile chasing my number 3 man, and at about the same time I'm turning back around towards the east. When I turn back around there, I get a contact on a contact that isn't squawking our IFS, so when I lock this guy up, I can tell that he's not a friendly airplane. Come to find out that it's an F-1. He's at about 8,000 feet headed west towards Baghdad, towards my number 3 and 4 men also, and we EID him as hostile. About 12 miles, I take a Fox 1, a radar missile. Everything's looking good. Thinking about taking another Fox 1, but no kind of interference or anything like that, so I just let one Fox 1 go. And about 4 miles in front of me, get a huge fireball. When he blew up, I could see pieces of the airplane blowing up. Obviously, it was at night. I couldn't see if a parachute or anything like that. It was a huge fireball. I don't anticipate anybody getting out of that.
The only Iraqi fighters to appear in significant numbers were the MiG-29 Fulcrum and the Mirage F-1. The Iraqis put up very little resistance during the air campaign, and in total, 35 Iraqi fighters were shot down during the conflict. There were no Allied losses as a result of air-to-air combat.
Well, so far it's been a big surprise that the Iraqi Air Force has not done anything, basically. They've come up to be shot down. Apparently, most of the aircraft are underground, and at the first week of the war, we're hearing things from the military briefers that 80% of the aircraft are still intact in hardened shelters. Therefore, it's been a non-player, and the dogfights have been fairly straightforward. Go to the 6 o'clock and shoot them down. The only double kill of the war has been a Saudi pilot who caught 2 F-1s with Exocet. He apparently had no trouble in downing them both.
This is what the Saudi F-15 pilot saw through his gun sight during the dogfight.
Target, bandit, bandit.
Stinger 2-0, confirm bandit.
That's a farm, bandit, bandit. Roger, the first target destroyed, the first target destroyed.
Copy.
3-4, no right. Okay, let's proceed back there.
Stinger 2-0, say ID of bandit.
Roger, bandit, both target destroyed, both target destroyed.
Copy, both flash.
That's affirmative.
The MiG-29 is an exceptionally capable airplane. It is, right now, in my opinion, the finest dogfighter that the Soviets have produced in the modern generation. But it's the training that drives this war so far. And you can put an ill-trained pilot in a very capable airplane and put him up against a well-trained pilot in an old airplane, and the well-trained pilot always wins. It is almost always the case that training makes the difference. So it tells me that they're not using the capability of the airplane. We've shot down 10 plus, apparently, MiG-29s, and they have not been big maneuvering fights. They've just been classic sort of get on his rear end and he isn't doing a whole lot and you shoot him down. So I don't think we're seeing what the airplane could really do.
The other side of the air superiority battle was the destruction of the Iraqi air bases. Many of the Iraqi aircraft were protected inside hardened concrete bunkers. Rather than laboriously destroy each bunker, the taxiways leading from the bunkers to the main runways were cut using anti-runway weapons. This dangerous mission was the specialty of the British Tornado squadrons using JP-233 munitions dispensers. The JP-233 munitions dispensers dropped dozens of sub-munitions on runways, putting them out of operation. The two British Tornado squadrons suffered a higher loss rate than other elements of the coalition air force. 5 Tornadoes were lost in combat during the first 2 weeks of the war, in no small measure due to their hazardous assignment. The Tornadoes flew their missions using a terrain-following radar. The pilots and their navigators cannot see the ground below. They must rely entirely on their instruments. By the third week of the war, with remnants of the Iraqi Air Force fleeing to Iran, the Tornadoes shifted their tactics away from the anti-runway mission to other types of strikes. Here, one of the squadrons is loaded with conventional bombs for attacks on Iraqi ammunition and missile supplies.
Stop. It's okay, come back. Okay, you twist it a bit. Let's go back. Yeah, now that. Let's take the weight off it. That's it. Okay? Weird? Yeah.
It's a very dynamic war, this one, so every single day we are looking at our tactics and trying to preserve the element of surprise. And it's quite natural that we are changing our tactics, attack headings and heights and so on. And it's not just a direct result. In fact, if you look at the number of sorties we've flown overall, the losses are extremely small indeed, much smaller than anybody actually had predicted. So this is just the nature of this type of warfare.
The Tornado GR-1 ground attack squadrons were supported by the Tornado F-3 interceptor squadrons. The F-3 version is a high-performance fighter armed with air-to-air missiles rather than bombs. The F-3 Tornadoes flew combat air patrols to prevent the interception of the ground attack squadrons by Iraqi fighters. French attack squadrons in the Gulf used the Jaguar strike fighter. The Jaguars were armed with a variety of weapons, including conventional bombs and rockets, and the precision attack AS-30L missile. This is a laser-guided missile which strikes targets illuminated by a laser designator carried by the Jaguar fighter. This gun camera footage shows an Iraqi hangar being destroyed by an AS-30L missile. Top cover for their missions came from the Mirage 2000 fighters of the 5th Fighter Squadron we see here. The workhorse of the United States Air Force strike units in Desert Storm was the F-111. The F-111 pilots of the 48th Tactical Fighter Wing were no strangers to combat, having led the attacks on Libya in 1986. The F-111 squadrons were used in night attack missions where pinpoint accuracy was essential. Using a paved tack pod, the F-111F can direct laser-guided bombs to hit precision targets such as bunkers or bridges. This F-111F is setting off on another mission over Iraq, armed with a pair of GBU-15 laser-guided bombs. The F-111's specialty during Desert Storm was night attack. Although the wild weasels and other anti-radar planes blinded much of the Iraqi air defense network, the Iraqis still had many conventional anti-aircraft guns aimed with optical sights. These guns were almost completely ineffective at night. The F-111 attacked at either low or medium altitudes, using its sophisticated terrain-following radar for navigation in the dark night skies. This F-111F has just returned from a mission over Iraq, during which it went into a terrain-following descent, known as a TF descent, to deliver its bomb payload.
Going in, we did a TF descent, drop it down to low level into it's a terrain-following radar, automatic system descent, where it's all totally dark outside and you just descend on radars, and so you're all on instruments. This is just this side of the border. We go across the border low level real fast, about 600 knots. During the descent, we were getting some indications on our raw gear. The radars, search radars were picking us up, so it was kind of intense. You know, knowing that they knew that we were coming, and not being able to see anything outside, and just kind of going on instruments. What we did was we came in low level, climbed to 5,000 feet, dropped the bombs. We turn away from the target, continue to laze until the bomb impacts, and then we get back down to low level for the egress. It gives the Wizzo a better look angle into the target and a little more energy on the bomb.
The paved tack pod underneath the F-111F is the key element in pinpoint laser strikes. The pod contains a laser designator. The weapons system officer, or Wizzo, aims the laser at the target, and the bomb homes in on reflecting laser light. The bombs have a small sensor in their nose, which can sense the laser light bouncing off the target. The sensor in the nose of the bomb automatically steers the bomb into the target. This is a videotape from an F-111F attacking an airfield in Iraq. Other strike units in the Gulf were equipped with the newer F-15E Strike Eagle. The Strike Eagle is a two-seat version of the single-seat F-15 Eagle Interceptor. The Wizzo, in the rear seat, operates the terrain-following radar and target sensors like his counterpart in the F-111F. This permitted the Strike Eagle squadrons to carry out their dangerous low-altitude missions under the protective cover of darkness during the opening stages of the air campaign. The Wizzo can see the target using a high-resolution radar imaging system, as we see here. In this case, he is examining an airfield and selecting targets. The F-15E is also fitted with a lantern night attack system. This provides the pilot and Wizzo with thermal images of the terrain in front of them. The Wizzo can then use the thermal imaging night vision system to pick out pinpoint targets first identified by the Corsair radar system. F-111s and F-15s took part in the anti-runway campaign using the French-designed Matra Durandal bomb. It is propelled by a rocket and penetrates deep below the runway, exploding moments later. Besides the specialized attack aircraft, fighter bombers were used extensively in Operation Desert Storm in daylight interdiction raids to pound Iraqi army formations. The F-16 fighter bomber bore the brunt of these missions for the U.S. Air Force. Many of the squadrons taking part in these missions were flown by Air National Guard pilots, their tails emblazoned with the insignia of their home stations, such as Syracuse, New York, or South Carolina. Prior to the war in the Gulf, these pilots were flying commercial airliners, while the ground crews were back in the States at their regular civilian jobs. The A-10, popularly called the Warthog by its pilots, played a unique role in the Desert Storm Air War. It is designed for close air support, attacking tank columns and artillery emplacements with gunfire, bombs, and guided missiles. In its nose is a massive 30mm multi-barrel cannon, able to penetrate the side armor and tops of tanks. The A-10's ability to get down low, hold up well against substantial ground fire, and hang around long enough to find targets made it one of the unsung heroes of coalition air forces. A-10s flew over 8,000 sorties during the war, attacking many targets, including Scud launch sites. Although the newer smart munitions, such as laser-guided bombs, attracted most of the attention during the war, over 90% of all bombs dropped on Iraqi targets were conventional. One of the most common munitions for close air support missions was the cluster bomb. A cluster bomb consists of an outer shell filled with dozens or hundreds of bomblets, depending on the mission it's required to fulfill. An anti-personnel cluster bomb will hold hundreds of small bomblets intended to eliminate infantry positions, while a cluster bomb designed for an anti-tank role will carry fewer but more powerful bomblets designed to knock out tanks and other armor weapons. After the cluster bomb is dropped, the outer container peels away and the target area is blanketed with a deadly carpet of explosions. The ground crew of this A-10 squadron is preparing a load of cluster bombs for an A-10 mission against Iraqi armed forces in occupied Kuwait. The high tempo of air operations was made possible not only by the determination of the pilots, but by the dedication and skill of the ground crews.
At the same time, we need to remember that our young maintenance kids around here, they're the real heroes in this. Pilots go fly the good jets and everything, but they're the ones that keep them going. And those are my heroes. These 21, 22-year-old kids that are out here turning these aircraft right now. They're the real heroes around here.
The U.S. Navy and Marine Corps also played a key role in the air war. Launched from carriers stationed in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf, the F-14 Tomcat provided combat air patrol for Navy strike missions, much like its land-based counterparts, the F-15 and the Tornado. Two squadrons of aging A-7s were also deployed in Operation Desert Storm. The A-7 was used for daytime interdiction missions, as well as attacks on airfields and other vital targets. Naval aviation offers the element of surprise. The mobility of the carriers allowed them to attack Iraq from unpredictable directions. The workhorse of the Navy attack squadrons in Operation Desert Storm was the A-6 Intruder, flown from carriers such as the USS Ranger seen here steaming in the Persian Gulf. The A-6E Intruder has more advanced night attack systems than earlier versions used in the Vietnam War. This combat camera footage comes from an A-6E Intruder on a night attack mission against a facility in Iraq. The A-6E has a night vision sensor called the TRAM, which enables it to attack targets day or night. Another weapon that saw its combat debut in Desert Storm was the SLAM missile. The SLAM is a version of the Harpoon anti-ship missile modified for use against land targets. It has a sensor in the nose which allows the weapons officer to see what the missile is seeing and fly it right into the target. The United States Marine Corps has its own aviation squadrons, flying many of the same types of aircraft as the Navy. The FA-18 Hornet was one of the most versatile aircraft in service during the war. The Hornet is a fighter bomber capable of dogfighting Iraqi fighters or attacking ground targets. During the initial phase of the Desert Storm air campaign, the Marine FA-18 squadrons were used in anti-radar missions firing HARM missiles, much like their Wild Weasel counterparts in the Air Force. The Marine Hornets flew from land bases situated around the Gulf. These Marine squadrons are preparing for anti-radar strikes against Iraqi positions. The AV-8B Harrier II jump jet formed the backbone of Marine ground attack squadrons during Operation Desert Storm. These jump jets operated from improvised runways near the front lines, providing close air support for nearby Marine ground units. While Marine intruders and Hornets attacked deep into Iraq, Harriers flew scores of missions into Kuwait, softening up Iraqi ground units for the impending ground assault. To permit aircraft to carry the maximum amount of weapons, they often took off with their fuel tanks only partially filled. Once airborne, they hooked up with aerial refueling aircraft, such as these Marine KC-130 tankers. Aerial refueling allowed them to carry out their missions deep into the center of Iraq. The tanker squadrons are one of a host of specialized support units essential to the conduct of air combat. These Marine tankers are filling the tanks of Marine and Navy strike aircraft.
Are still hanging back. They haven't gotten in their hoses yet. Had to receive and it'll only go home. That's a big wave up there. It's too bad we can't say it's Miller time.
With its air force decimated and coalition air forces dominating the skies, the Iraqis were forced to resort to their Scud missiles to attack Saudi Arabia. Attacks were also launched at Israel in an attempt to widen the war. Scud is a NATO code name for the Soviet R-17 Zemlya ballistic missile. The Iraqis have modified the missiles into a longer-ranged version called the Al-Hussein.
The original missile, the original Scud, or as the Russians would call it, R-17, is a relatively short-range system. Its range is around 300 kilometers, meaning about 200 miles. That's not far enough to fire from Iraq into some of the targets that it wanted to hit. Originally, what was happening, this was back in the time of the Iran-Iraq War, the Iraqis wanted to target Tehran, which is quite a ways from the Iraqi border. So what they did is they would take 3 Scuds and chop them up and take the fuel cells out of them and lengthen the missile to put more fuel in it, and at the same time cut down on the warhead weight. And this combination of features, cutting down on the warhead weight and expanding the amount of fuel in it, gave them greater range. It doubled the effective range from around 225 miles to somewhere in the neighborhood of 450 miles to enable them to hit Tehran. Well, it also enabled them, in this context, to be fired from within Iraq and hit targets such as Dhahran or Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, or for that matter, to hit targets in Israel, Haifa or Tel Aviv.
The large number of mobile Scud launchers proved to be a greater problem than was originally anticipated.
At the outset of the war, there were 2 main groupings of Scuds. There was a group of mobile Scuds and a group of fixed-site Scuds. The mobile Scuds are missiles that are mounted on a large 8-wheel truck. The military acronym is usually TEL, which stands for Transporter, Erector, Launcher. It means that the vehicle carries the missile and also can erect the missile, put it vertical, and fire it. That was one group. That was about 36 launchers, and they were divided into at least 2 launch brigades, perhaps more. One of the groups was located north of the Kuwaiti border in the eastern section of Iraq. There was another group of these that were located further out in the west, more towards the Israeli direction in the western desert of Iraq. Now, the second grouping was a fixed-site grouping. What it was is that the Iraqis started building the Scud missiles themselves, their own local derivative of the Scud. They couldn't build these elaborate mobile launchers, and so they simply took simple base plates to erect the missile, and then they set up concrete bunkers. In the first wave of attacks, these bunker sites were the first ones that were targeted. The reason for this was that the bunker sites were out in the western section of Iraq, near H2 and H3 airfield in western Iraq, and they were clearly targeted at the Israelis. So there was a fear right from the outset of the war that what the Iraqis were trying to do was drag in the Israelis into the war, and so those were the first targets. At first, the mobile Scud missile launchers were not a major target, but then once the Iraqis started firing these at targets in Israel and at Saudi Arabia, a great deal of attention was paid into hunting them out and trying to destroy them. The reason that they're not terribly accurate is that they were designed originally to deliver thermonuclear warheads. These weapons were developed in the 1950s by the Soviet Army to fire tactical nuclear warheads. So with their export to countries like Iraq or Libya, they have to be used in a different role because these countries don't have small thermonuclear weapons. Instead, they're used with high explosive weapons, and here they can't really be used effectively against military targets. Their inaccuracy is so great. They have an accuracy roughly on the order of 1 kilometer to about a mile on either side of the target. And if the missile is erected in great haste, as appears to have been the case with many of these missile launches, the accuracy is even worse. It could be 5 miles off, 6 miles off, 7 miles off. So it's really more a terror weapon. It can be used for the bombardment of very large military targets, such as airfields. We've seen a lot of attacks against Iran, for example. But when you come right down to it, it's mainly a terror weapon to be used against civilian targets that aren't protected.
Anticipating an Iraqi missile attack, American forces deployed the Patriot system near cities and bases in Saudi Arabia. The Patriot is a medium to high-altitude anti-aircraft missile developed by the U.S. Army. In the mid-1980s, it was modified to enable it to shoot down ballistic missiles, as shown in this 1986 test firing against an Army Lance missile. At the heart of the Patriot fire unit is a sophisticated phased array radar. The radar locates and tracks the incoming Scud missile and then guides the Patriot missile on an intercept course.
Last night about 21:45 or 9:45 in the evening, we'd received words that there was possible Scud alert, incoming Scuds. With the mission we have, we're always on alert 24 hours a day, so it's just a matter of fine-tuning some things, and shortly thereafter we received the first volley of Scud missiles headed towards this area and successfully knocked them out of the sky.
This footage shows the Patriot in action against Scud missiles. Never before had an air defense missile proved so consistently successful. These encounters marked the first time in military history that one missile had been shot down by another in wartime. The streaks of light falling to Earth are the debris of Scud missiles intercepted above the clouds by the Patriot missiles. Although the Patriot proved to be successful in intercepting the Scuds, Iraqi missiles still managed to do some damage. In some cases, the Patriot struck near the Scud, breaking it into 3 large pieces. Falling to Earth at high speed, this debris caused extensive damage to residential neighborhoods in Tel Aviv and Riyadh. During the war, coalition air forces flew 109,876 sorties and dropped 88,500 tons of bombs. The relentless pace of the air missions continued throughout the entire conflict. 35 Iraqi fighters were shot down in dogfights, while no Allied aircraft were lost in air-to-air battles. Encounters with Iraqi aircraft were rare. The bulk of Iraq's air force chose to hide in concrete bunkers or flee to neighboring Iran. Thanks to the severity of the air campaign and the success of the Patriot anti-missile system, the Scud threat also proved minimal. With the Battle of the Skies firmly won, coalition forces switched their focus from strategic targets, including air suppression, to a more tactical role, focusing on Iraqi troop concentrations in and near Kuwait. The war was far from over, as coalition air forces turned their attention to Iraqi ground forces in preparation for the impending ground assault.